Republican Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has long been popular among conservatives, and that's what makes it so bizarre that yesterday he issued an executive order, and when doing so, he invoked a phrase to justify that executive order that is probably the single most mocked and ridiculed phrase in right-wing discourse. And he didn't invoke this phrase ironically or as a way of making some kind of point. He invoked it earnestly. And the way that I know that is because he has a long history of embracing measures very similar to the one that he embraced yesterday, and has done so repeatedly for the same objective. And it's not just Greg Abbott, but red state legislatures and Republican governors throughout the country have also embraced similar measures for similar reasons. And so before we comment on that, let me just show you exactly what it is that he said here from the office of the Texas Governor Greg Abbott on March 27th, 2024. You see the headline, Governor Abbott fights anti-Semitic acts at Texas colleges and universities. And he's touting a executive order that he issued, and it says the following, quote, "The governor's executive order requires that all higher education institutions in Texas review their free speech policies to establish appropriate punishments for anti-Semitic rhetoric," which is another word for speech, "on college and university campuses, ensure that policies that address the sharp rise of anti-Semitic acts are enforced, and include the definition of anti-Semitism in free speech policies." Now, note here, among other things, that he is not protecting all Texas students from being attacked for their views or for their religious beliefs or for their identity. He's issuing an executive order that is designed to protect one group of students and only one group of students, namely Jewish students, from only one type of bigotry, namely anti-Semitism. He's not protecting students from anti-black racism or anti-white racism or Islamophobia or transphobia or xenophobia or any other kind of bigotry. This is a measure that is designed to protect one particular group of people in the society identified by a demographic characteristic, and is designed to require that universities enact measures to combat a certain kind of rhetoric aimed at a certain kind of group. Not hateful rhetoric in general, just rhetoric that he deems to be hateful in particular toward this group in particular. The executive order that he signed is here. And it went on, quote, it cites the following: "Incidents of anti-Semitism have increased since Hamas's attack, and the proliferation of anti-Semitism at public universities is particularly concerning. Multiple protests and walkouts have been staged by university student organizations, with students chanting anti-Semitic phrases, such as 'From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free.'" Now, there again, he's explicitly stating that the motivation for adopting this measure is not that students are being violently attacked, but that instead they're hearing political phrases that upset them, like "Palestine will be free from the river to the sea." I thought that it was pretty much of a consensus among conservatives and Republicans and people on the right that words are not violence. And yet, again, over and over, this executive order cites things like speech and rhetoric and political phrases. It then goes on. Section 519315C2 of the Texas Education Code provides that students should not participate in, and higher education institutions should not allow, expression that is unlawful or disrupts the operations and of the institution. And whereas anti-Semitism and the harassment of Jewish students have no place on Texas university campuses and will not be tolerated by my administration, therefore I, Greg Abbott, Governor of Texas, by virtue of the power and authority vested in me by the Constitution and laws of the state of Texas, hereby direct all Texas higher education institutions to do the following. 1, review and update free speech policies. This is a Republican governor, a conservative governor, part of a political movement in the United States that has spent years objecting to attacks on free speech on college campuses, speech codes on college campuses in the name of protecting certain minority groups from bigoted speech. And this is exactly what this order is designed to do. He is directing that Texas universities, colleges, update their free speech policies to address the sharp rise in anti-Semitic speech. And then he adds on, and acts. But the only kinds of acts cited on university campuses are things like chanting. Obviously, if somebody attacks Jewish students or threatens Jewish students with violence, it's already a crime. Or it's already a violation of campus code, but it's also a crime in society. You can't physically attack people or threaten to attack people with violence anywhere in the United States without committing a crime. You don't need to change free speech codes at Texas campuses to address that. You just need to change Texas free speech codes to constrict the kinds of views that people are permitted to express about a foreign country, Israel, if you want to make Jewish students feel more comfortable, which is exactly what Greg Abbott, when justifying this executive order, said was his goal. It went on. 2, ensure that these policies are being enforced on campuses and that groups such as the Palestine Solidarity Committee and Students for Justice in Palestine are disciplined for violating these policies. He does not say that pro-Israel student groups should be punished in any way if they violate these policies, or any other group for that matter. He's singling out one group of students that he wants to protect, Jewish students, one type of speech that he wants to constrict, which is criticism of Israel or pro-Palestinian speech, and one type of student group that he wants to target and punish, which are pro-Palestinian groups. Now, all of these measures are completely aligned with Greg Abbott's own personal political views. He's a fanatical supporter of Israel. Greg Abbott's not Jewish, he's an evangelical Christian. And he has talked about the importance of Israel to him personally and to his religion and to his culture. And he has every right to be a fanatical supporter of Israel if he wants, for whatever reasons, religious, political, ideological. That's, of course, within his rights. But to trifle with speech codes on college campuses in Texas by tightening the permissive range of speech to prevent people from expressing views that Greg Abbott finds offensive, to protect a particular cause that is important to Greg Abbott, and to punish student groups whose cause and whose views are antithetical to his, is the exact kind of tyranny that conservatives have been denouncing, rightfully so, when it has come from the liberal left in multiple ways, including on college campuses over the last decade. He goes on, quote, number 3, include the definition of anti-Semitism adopted by the state of Texas in section 448.001 of the Texas Government Code in university free speech policies to guide university personnel and students on what constitutes anti-Semitic speech. Now, I believe that we have the tweet, and if we don't, we should get it, where Governor Abbott explains the reason for this executive order and specifically says that he wants to create safe spaces for Jewish students. So I don't see that tweet here, so we're going to get that tweet though. But when Greg Abbott announced his executive order, he explicitly said that the reason for this executive order was that he wants to create what he explicitly called safe spaces on Texas's campus. Let me just show you the tweet that Governor Abbott posted when he announced the executive order. There you see it on the screen. He said, this is Governor Abbott yesterday, quote, anti-Semitism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of anti-Semitism at Texas colleges and universities. Texas stands with our Jewish students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the Jewish community. Now, just imagine, had this been about any other group, imagine if Governor Abbott had said anti-black racism, can we put that tweet back on the screen, please? Anti-black racism will not be tolerated in Texas. Today I'm issuing an executive order to fight the increase in acts of racism at Texas colleges. Texas stands with our black students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the black community. Imagine the anger and mockery that would have provoked among almost every conservative I can think of. Or imagine if he had said, transphobia will not be tolerated in Texas. Today I issued an executive order to fight the increase in acts of transphobia on Texas campuses. Texas stands with our trans students. We will ensure our college campuses are safe spaces for the LGBT community. That would have probably led to his impeachment. Why is this any different? Why is this any better? To constrict speech, to direct administrators to trifle with free speech codes, to more broadly define anti-Semitism, to punish the expression of political phrases that make Jewish students feel unsafe, to turn college campuses into safe spaces, not for everybody, but solely for Jewish students, who, according to Governor Abbott, and if you look at the executive order as we just did, he's not claiming there's an epidemic of violence against Jewish students. He's claiming that there's a expression of views against Israel that's making them feel uncomfortable. And the argument has always been, I've been a big supporter of this argument, that college students are adults. And if there's any place in the country where free speech should reign, where dissent should reign, where even taboos should be able to be permitted to be expressed, where orthodoxies have to be challenged without constraints, it's in academia. That's what academia is for. And one of the things you send your adult children to college in order to do is learn how to hear arguments that make them uncomfortable and to engage with them and to think critically, not to be shielded and protected by them. And yet here you have a Republican governor doing exactly that, which conservatives have said for years they find reprehensible and dangerous. And again, he's not doing it as tit for tat or ironically, because he's been doing it for many years, long before October 7th, as we'll show you. Now, one of the people, as I was saying, who, in addition to Candace Owen and Tucker Carlson and several others, who is objecting, and I think this is the first time he's stood up and spoke out on this in response to Governor Abbott, is Christopher Russo, who has been working with Governor DeSantis on the Florida educational system, and in particular trying to remove notions that any particular group of people will be discriminated against by dogma or by university policy. And Christopher Russo, in response to Governor Abbott's executive order, said the following, quote, "I am committed to the fight against anti-Semitism on campus, but I am concerned about the highlighted provisions in Governor Abbott's executive order, which instructs universities to, quote, update free speech policies to prohibit, quote, anti-Semitic speech. How is such a policy different from DEI programs, which are diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that conservatives have begun to focus on in a very negative way?" He says, how is such a policy different from DEI programs promising to prohibit, quote, anti-black speech? And why not include anti-white speech, which, as I have shown in my reporting, is institutionalized at the University of Texas? What is the rationale for one but not the other, or the others? He goes on, "The problem to me seems to be conduct rather than speech, shutting down speakers, threatening students, mobilizing mobs, calling for violence, all of which can be regulated as prohibited conduct with a universal rather than particular policy." Exactly. If you really want to limit conduct, and I think you need to be very careful that you're not limiting legitimate political protest, the idea that you're going to enact special rules for special groups is madness. And that you're going to single out particular student groups that have a policy view and an ideology that differ from the Republican governor is so blatantly tyrannical. Why would these rules not apply to every single student equally? He goes on, quote, "There is a better solution. Provide simple, clear, general rules that apply equally to all groups, a universal standard. It will solve the immediate problem of rising anti-Semitism while providing a long-term framework that respects the right to free speech and equal protection." Now, this idea that there's an epidemic of anti-Semitism that's unique and singular in the United States is something that we have very critically examined in the past. I think it's very, 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 very difficult to argue that American Jews are some uniquely marginalized and vulnerable and endangered group. Every metric suggests otherwise. And if you look at things like racist massacres, there has been a terrible racist massacre that was carried out against Jewish people in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. There have been more than one, many, many more than one, carried against black people in the United States. If you look at hate crime self-reporting. It's true there's an increase in anti-Semitism, self-reporting incidents. There's also a significant increase in anti-Black incidents since the George Floyd riots and anti-LGBT hate crimes in the last several years as well. It's almost impossible to argue that anti-Semitism is some epidemic. And the fact that, as we said, it's making the cover of every major magazine. Time magazine, as we went over yesterday, we covered the article published by The Atlantic. I think shows that there's a lot of very influential people who stand perfectly ready, and not just ready, but very able to combat anti-Semitism if, in fact, that it takes place. I think American Jews are doing pretty well in the United States and don't need special privileges and rules, especially when it comes to trifling with free speech on college campuses. But this is something that has been going on for a long, long time in the United States, namely that although there's a lot of attention paid to censorship of conservative speech on social media and on college campuses, and that has been something that we have covered and denounced, one of the most frequent forms of censorship in the United States, and especially on college campuses and through state power, is censorship aimed not at conservative speech, but at critics of the state of Israel. And Texas Governor Greg Abbott has been one of the people responsible for some of the most aggressively anti-free speech measures long before October 7th. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.